Welcome to the Startup Leader Show, where we speak with startup founders and executives. I'm your host, Lisa Dreher, and I'm excited to introduce our guest for today, Sean McClinton. He wears a lot of hats. He's founder and board member of Space Northwest and founder of Space Entrepreneurs, and also manages business operations for RBC Signals. Welcome to the show, Sean.
Thank you, Lisa. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so thanks for making time for this. Maybe you can start by just telling us a little bit about your background and then all of these amazing organizations that you're involved in.
Sure thing. So I was born and raised here in the greater Seattle area and grew up, my dad is a CPA, and so I grew up seeing interesting ideas, interesting businesses where people did things at the crossroads of their passion and also, doing well for themselves in business. And I thought that's the greatest thing in the world. You can do something that you love, that you're passionate about, and you can also earn a good living doing that. And so I always wanted to do something in entrepreneurship. Went to school in California, studied business, but I always had that eye on how could I make a career out of entrepreneurship. Right out of school, I actually went to China and I worked in a consumer products business, an American-owned consumer products business, and helped launch a consumer product to the American market within a few months of arriving. And so that was a whirlwind journey. Learned a ton there about marketing. Went to work at Microsoft. Got married, started a family, spent some time at PACCAR. So startups to Fortune 100 companies. Somewhere through that process, I realized while I loved all of the opportunities that I was working on, there was something was kind of nagging at me that there was something greater out there that would be more fulfilling. Didn't know what it was. But again, going back to those entrepreneurial roots, I was like, I've always been inspired by the software and IT ecosystems and the great founders, whether that's, Bill Gates of Microsoft or Steve Jobs at Apple or people like that starting these incredible businesses. And I was like, well, video games and software, those are more mature. There's, what would be the next industry that I could get in on the ground floor of something exciting? And I started just kind of looking around. And at the time, it was just after the X Prize, and space was an industry. I was like, SpaceX was just getting started. And I'm like, there's something going on here. Let me go check it out. So I went down to New Mexico to ISPCS, which is no longer happens, but it was an incredible conference. And I found myself rubbing shoulders with astronauts and Boeing executives and lots of, no pun intended, down to earth people. And I was like, this is really cool. There's something going on here that's exciting. So it kind of fit that entrepreneurial bent, and just started looking for a way to apply my skills, business background in a STEM driven industry. For me, that started with selling tickets, selling space tourism with Virgin Galactic. A travel business grew out of that for me. And then once I realized I loved the industry, I started the Space Entrepreneurs Meetup. So that's the crossroads of space and entrepreneurship. And I just figured, I'll just see what happens. And our first meetup was 3 people, and our next meetup was 100 with a keynote speaker here in the Seattle area. And so I realized at that time, like, there was other people were interested in space, like I was in this area. And so we just kept doing the meetups and trying to educate people on the unique challenges of space, that, at the crossroads of space and entrepreneurship and business. Through that, I met Christopher Richens, founder of RBC Signals, and he actually came and spoke to our Space Entrepreneurs group. And the feedback on his speech was by far and away our best event, because he worked at Boeing Sea Launch and showed us videos of the launches and his experiences on the console. And we were all just like, wow, that's so crazy. And then he shared his reason and vision for starting RBC. Eventually joined on and have been with RBC for 6 years now, and just on that entrepreneurial journey, learning from people like Christopher and Ron Faith, President COO, who has a deep startup background in Silicon Valley and Apple and things like that. So lastly, I guess the Space Northwest piece is kind of trying to roll up a lot of what's going on from an entrepreneurial standpoint in space under one umbrella, so we can give the space industry a clearer, louder voice amongst the other industries here in the area, and hopefully, grow commercial space here. So I'll stop there, but that's just a little bit about me.
Wow, amazing, amazing. So, yeah, just fantastic. And I think that the space industry here in the Northwest has continued to expand in the last, decade or so. It just continues to grow. So, it's really exciting that we have these groups right here in our backyard. So, yeah, thanks for talking
Sure.
about all of that.
Sure. Yeah, it's a long and winding journey, but
Indeed, indeed. So when you think about, I mean, you can talk about these organizations that you started or working with RBC or any of these experiences that you've had. What have you found have been the biggest keys to success?
yeah. I mean, I think if, even going back to my experience in that consumer products company, um, and the space industry, kind of being notorious for being, taking a long time to develop. We've seen lots of milestones in space recently, and there was a little bit of a lull, and with the Starship static fire and hopefully orbital launch coming, I feel like we're going to get back to a cadence of these milestones. But there are long periods of time in between where um, nothing much appears to happen. There's a lot of work being done behind the scenes. But for investors, that's, I think, one of the challenges of space is looking at a SaaS company, right, and a 3-year exit, or sometimes even faster, versus a space company that could have a much longer time horizon to ROI. So being able to be patient and ride out those cycles, and for me, really tying in what I'm doing to what I believe in, what I think is important, I think has allowed me to stay on that path for so long. When if it's just the money, or if it's just other factors that aren't as aligned with who you are, you're kind of a reed blowing in the wind, right? You might just move on to the next thing. So yeah, perseverance, I think, is and persistence is one thing that I think has contributed to be able to do some of these cool things.
Yeah, yeah. What have been some of the most valuable business lessons that you've learned along the way?
Yeah. So I think that um, for space entrepreneurs, the power of networking, being able to connect people. So in space, as I mentioned, is a STEM driven industry, right? And it will always be at the core of this industry, right? When you talk about the future. That being said, when I got into the space industry, people were saying, we need to expand the types of people that are coming into this industry, so we need more diversity. And people were super welcoming to me, and I kind of felt like an outsider, but I've tried to kind of carry that forward in terms of helping others get into the space industry, to help it grow. And so, um, when you're working on a complex technology, you tend to be kind of in a heads down. You may love the technology and want to spend all your time on it, but to be able to get out and network with others, I guess from a space entrepreneur standpoint, that's the function we've tried to serve. You have geographically distributed companies and organizations. Even in this, area, it's not that big, but getting people together to network, when it may not feel comfortable, it may not be intuitive. I think that's been reiterated to me, especially in an industry like space.
Yeah, definitely. When you think back, I guess, as you were starting either the organizations or starting out with RBC Signals, are there things that if you were to, I guess, start all over knowing what you know now, what would you do differently?
Yeah, I think that again, you know, what we are taught in school is tends to be oriented towards skill development, right? You need, whether that's software engineering, computer science, marketing, which is all very important, right? But we don't spend time on figuring out, who are we, what's important to us, and how do we align our career to that. And so for me as an adult, that part of this has been a process of discovery. For example, in space, I read The Overview Effect, the book by Frank White, which talks about the experience of the astronauts going into space. And it's very clear from my perspective, like when you read the astronaut stories, like just how life-changing, going up into space and looking down on the Earth is. And for me, that crystallized, like, there's all kinds of reasons to explore space, but for me, that was the one that was most relevant, and I was, have tried to center everything I do around that. So, spending time, whether it's career consulting or going through a process of, okay, this is what I'm doing and why, and this is how these activities are going to help accomplish those things. So I probably would spend more time on that, and then go out and build a career around that. So.
Got it. So are you on the list to go to space with one of the space tourism companies?
Not yet, but I'm trying to build the relationships where hopefully that door will open someday. So.
Excellent. Okay. So one of the things that I think we run into a lot as we're growing organizations is that there's just these roadblocks that come up along the way. What have you found are the best ways to work around through those roadblocks?
Yeah. Certainly with RBC Signals having, been there since the seed round was raised in 2017 to where we are today, through everything in between, I can say that we have run about as lean an operation as you can run on some level, but have weathered all of the economic ups and downs and the space industry investment, cycles. So that's really taught me, all of the ins and outs of, managing cash flow and growing at the right pace, and, when to invest and where. We have seen headwinds recently from an economic standpoint where, interest rates are going up, investments going down, and we think we're going to see more consolidation and more companies go out of business. In fact, we just saw a launch provider, I think today or yesterday, announce a bankruptcy. So while some of the companies that raise money get a lot of press and there's a lot of flash and a lot of hype, sometimes that conservative approach in the early days can help you weather a lot of those storms that are just part of, especially in an industry like space.
Yeah, indeed. No kidding. So when you think about, I guess, the future, what would be your one prediction about what will come to pass?
Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting one. I guess, so for me, I'm big on vision, right? And so vision speaks directly to the future. And I know when I first heard Blue Origin's vision of millions of people living and working in space, I was like, wow, that is a really grand vision. It's really inspiring, and so for me, when I think about, wanting to have the overview effect experience myself, and believing that there's a quote in the overview effect. I think it was Bill Nelson, current administrator of NASA, when he went up on his space flight. He basically said, if I could just bring up the politicians to this vantage point and look down and see what I'm seeing, like, maybe, the gridlock and all the, the normal issues of Congress wouldn't be so difficult. Maybe we would all have a better perspective. So, when I look at technology and politics and how those have kind of skewed human relationships, and thinking about, people being able to have the overview effect experience, maybe helping solve that problem. That's kind of what I'm passionate about. But when we think about a future where now you have Axiom, you have Orbital Reef, you have these commercial space station companies just coming online, obviously launch cadence is increasing, launch costs are falling. And if you have the Starship Singularity, where all of a sudden you can get a whole lot more up into space, then I think that vision of millions of people living and working in space, or even beyond living and working, just experiencing space, can become a reality. Of course, timeline is always the question. But once we have an active, LEO, low Earth orbit ecosystem, then we look at the moon, then we look at Mars, and then that whole spacefaring species idea doesn't seem so far-fetched. So I think we're well on our way, and that trend is irreversible. But on a day-to-day basis, it can still seem hard to imagine. So
Yeah. Yeah. So thinking about, I guess, just that whole development cycle for space startups, and I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier that there's just a longer time frame, right, to get these companies off the ground. What
yeah,
sort of advice or would you give from your perspective to space startup leaders on, I guess, getting through that longer cycle? How do you kind of stretch past that, especially given like what you were just saying, with companies, you know, struggling a little bit, some companies, right, struggling a little bit in the industry. What
yeah,
what advice would you give?
yeah. I mean, you know, Elon and SpaceX, for better or worse, I think one lesson that I have learned that I've tried to pass on to our meetup group and our community is the idea that you can have a grand vision, which is inherent to space, unlike any other industry. The settlement of Mars, right? But you can find ways to make money today that allow you to perfect the technology that you need to achieve that grand vision. We've had people come through and say, well, if I can just find a billionaire to fund my idea, I can make it work. And so while that might be true, the chances of finding somebody who can do that are pretty slim, right?
Mhm.
But how do you reframe that problem and think about, what are the applications on Earth that we can solve today with the technology we have available, and then how does that help us achieve our long-term vision? With
Mhm.
an eye on profitability in the short term, or growth, and depending on how you were funded, how much, what results do you need to show to your investors and when? So tying those components together, I think is one way to get through some of those early challenges.
Great, great. Can you tell us just a little bit more about RBC Signals and what they're doing in the industry?
Yeah. So before the term ground station as a service was, more well known than it is today. So Christopher Richens was the founder was an early employee at Planetary Resources, and he was tasked with buying communication services for them. And at the time, realized there weren't any commercially available flexible options there. And so that became the genesis of the idea for RBC Signals. And when he looked at where the industry was at that time, and lots of spacecraft going up, no flexible communication options, RBC Signals was born. And so the idea of purchasing communications as a service in an industry that traditionally was kind of single satellite, single ground station, single mission model that's quote unquote bespoke. So very expensive, very customized, trying to transition the industry into a more standardized, more flexible model has been, what RBC Signals, I would say, is all about. So serving the satellite operator, and so without communications and ground stations, there's really no value that can be generated from space. You have basically flying bricks up there. So really, whether you say data is the new oil or what have you, just again, being able to access and create value from space. It's not sexy, it's not launch, but it's a key part of what's happening. And as more spacecraft goes up, it only becomes more important. So, and just the challenge technically of getting data down from an object that's moving 17,000 miles an hour, and only has 10 minutes horizon to horizon to bring down that data is. Some call it black art or magic or what have you, but that's if you're a satellite operator, do you want to spend your time on that, or do you want to focus on your core competencies? You can easily get distracted or overwhelmed by other challenges. So
Yeah, no doubt. Okay. So tell us how to connect with Space Northwest and space entrepreneurs and RBC Signals. How do we get in touch with all of these organizations or get involved?
yeah, so Space Northwest, again, we are geographically located in Greater Seattle. As in the name, we serve the Northwest region, so that's Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Alaska, and so forth. So we're trying to bring, again, space interested people and help them turn their ideas into reality. We've got a website, spacenorthwest.org, space entrepreneurs. We have our meetup, so that's meetup.com/space entrepreneurs. We just did a startup weekend, as you know, in December, and we will have more events supporting entrepreneurs who are interested in space coming up the rest of the year that we'll be announcing here soon. The Space Happy Hours put on by Craig Bearwalt and Sigma Design. Those are good ways to connect and network here in the area. So those would be 3 ways to start. I think we can publish my contact information if people have more specific questions, but
Okay, great. Well, Sean, thank you so much for making time to be here today. And as your predictions become a reality, as we get people out there in space, living and working in space, we'll have you join us again and talk about that.
that sounds great, Lisa. Yeah, it was fun talking, and look forward to the day where maybe we do this in space, or maybe we just talk about all the amazing things that have happened since the last time we talked. So
Absolutely. Thank you so much.